Live on Citizen TV, we bring you live pictures now from the Windsor Golf Club, where an international conference on drugs and law enforcement is going on as we speak. Acting Interior CS Dr. Fred Matiang'i expected to address this gathering any minute now, and we will take you back there as soon as we have an indication that he's about to step up to the podium. And so that's one event that we are monitoring right now within Nairobi. We are also following events at the Radisson Blu Hotel, where the CS for Public Service, Youth and Gender Affairs, Cecily Kariuki, will officially launch a partnership aimed at creating employment for the youth. Some preliminary speeches going on right now. As soon as the CS also steps up to that podium, we will bring you this meeting that kicked off at about 9 o'clock this morning. Well, we're also live from different parts of the country, not just in Nairobi. Let's now get an update from Martin Munene in Nyeri County. Martin, when we spoke, I believe, on Friday, you told us that Nyeri residents eagerly awaiting tomorrow's swearing in of President Uhuru Kenyatta, and also planning how amongst themselves that supporters of the president from that county can be ferried in buses to the Moi International Sports Center, Kasarani. Maybe give us an idea of the sort of logistics that have been put in place for that to happen.
A very good morning to you, Wahiga Mora, and like you said, you're getting us live from Nyeri County a day before the president is sworn in for his second term. And like you said, Nyeri County is one of his strongholds, one of the counties that really came out in large numbers on the 26th and also on 8th and voted overwhelmingly in favor of President Uhuru Kenyatta. And like you say, on Friday we had a conversation with the governor, and that conversation has gone on with other leaders in this county, having made arrangements to actually have people ferried from across this particular county to Nairobi. The county government, on its part, has 15 buses that are available in the 6 constituencies from Nyeri County to actually help anyone who's willing to actually travel to Nairobi to attend the particular ceremony. But also other leaders have come out and said that they also have arrangements of their own. For example, Rigathi Gachagua, who is the Madeira Member of Parliament, has actually said that he has about 10 buses to ferry people from his constituency to Nairobi. Anybody who's actually willing will be provided for with transport. But also, I must say, there are local arrangements in the county. For example, in one of the markets in Nyeri County, Chaka Market, traders have come together, and tomorrow, though they don't plan to go to Nairobi, they have actually contributed money, and they've actually purchased 3 goats and 2 cows, which they say they'll slaughter and share amongst themselves and with people of that particular region, that is Chaka, just to celebrate what they say is a victory for them. And I must say that their emphasis is on the fact that the election period is over, and so they feel their businesses actually will come back to normal. But all that said, Wahiga, I must also say that we are also witnessing a political talk among leaders in the county and in the region. Of course, having voted for President Kenyatta, questions now arise: what will they get from the second term of President Uhuru Kenyatta? On Friday, the governor of Nyeri County laid out some of the things that he expects to see happen in Nyeri County. We've got projects that have stalled. We've got a market in Karatina. We've got dams, 2 dams, actually mega dams in Kieni constituency. We've got a hospital in Othaya, which is actually meant to be a referral hospital. And so these are some of the things that Nyeri residents are actually expecting to happen once the president is sworn in. But also on the political side, some leaders have come out, though most of one of them actually denied those claims. They're saying that one of the things they expect from this region is a CS post. And so leaders are actually coming out saying that the president can choose whoever he wishes to nominate for a CS position. But some leaders in this particular region feeling that it is important that the president actually appreciates the effort that they put in campaigning, but also the effort that the people put to come out and vote by giving them a CS post. So Wahiga, from Nyeri County, is that people are excited about tomorrow. They're eager. We expect celebrations in this particular town and across the county, but we also expect a lot of people from this particular region and county to be ferried to Nairobi in order for them to attend the Kasarani ceremony tomorrow. And that is how things are in this county, Wahiga Mora.
Well, thank you so much, Martin Munene, for that update, reporting live from Nyeri County, just giving some ideas about the logistics around how many Nyeri residents will, make their way to the Moi International Sports Center, Kasarani, and of course a bit of politics around that region as well. Well, let's take you back now to the Windsor Golf Club and just listen in to that international conference on drugs and law enforcement.
Meeting conference where ministers from the Eastern Africa region will be invited to discuss the progress of implementation of work done in the Eastern Africa region with support of UNODC, as well as I said, endorsing the regional program, endorsing the outcome document. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my honor to invite our regional representative, Mr. Jose Villa de Castillo, to give his welcome remarks. Thank you.
Karibu Kenia. Bienvenidos a todos. Bem-vindo. I think some Brazilians also coming. Bienvenue. I am Jose Villa del Castillo. I am the regional representative of UNODC for Eastern Africa. We cover 13 different countries. All of them are here. Some months ago, as you are aware, in Djibouti, in the seaport of Djibouti, 500 kilos of cocaine were seized, coming directly from São Paulo in Brazil, and passing through the port of Algeciras in the south of Spain, crossing the Channel of Suez, and stopping by in Djibouti, where the drugs were seized. I received a telephone call from the Attorney General of Djibouti, Mr. Maki, asking for our help in order to help the Djiboutian government to tackle this very new issue, because it was the first time in the history of Djibouti that they even could see how the cocaine was. We sent there some experts, but at the same time, 2 or 3 weeks later, I went to Djibouti and I told Mr. Maki, you need to get in contact with the Spaniards, you need to get in contact with the Brazilians, you need to get in contact with the Colombians. And he said, I don't have the contacts, I don't know even how to do it. And I said, okay, I'm going to sort it out. So welcome to the first meeting of America, Africa, and Asia on this very, very issue. The aim of the meeting, I have a long speech here, I'm not going to read it. The aim of this very meeting, the 3 objectives of this very meeting from my point of view is, first of all, you need to get to know each other, you need to interchange your different contacts, because the problem of drugs related to cocaine and heroin in Eastern Africa is becoming one of the major threats related to security, related to governance, related to social stability in the region. The second objective is that Asian countries and Latin American countries have been fighting against drug trafficking for at least 40 years. I arrived to Latin America in 1997, and I was working with the Andean Pact on the issue of cocaine drug trafficking. I was working in Venezuela, I was working in Ecuador, in Peru, and in Colombia, of course. At that time, they started creating the institutions that now are, under my point of view, a proof of excellence in the way they fight drug trafficking, in the way they interrelate with the rest of the Latin American countries, in the way they approach the issue from the continental perspective. And I haven't been to Asia, but I know that the Asian countries have been already creating exactly the same structures in order to fight drug trafficking in that area. Africa could have the possibility of creating this kind of networking. We need to make sure that all the best practices, we need to make sure that everything that we have been learning for the last 40 years in the different parts of the world.
Well, we'll be taking you back there when CS Matiang'i is about to make his statement. And my panel now, Joy Mdiva, an advocate of the High Court, now joins us. Joy, welcome. Kaikai Kissinger, briefly talk to us a little bit about the cost, because this has been a big talking point even as we look towards tomorrow's inauguration. If you go to social media as well, people really going at it, you know, and also conflicting messages. Is it 300 million? Is it 374 million? 374. But more importantly, let's compare with the costs of 2013, where the money went to and what we can expect this time around, briefly.
I think when you're talking about the issue of the cost, remember that there's a committee, or there's a committee that is established under the act we spoke about, the Office of the Assumption of the President's Act. Now this committee of course meets and then discusses and drafts a budget. So once they have drafted that budget, then the budget is taken to Treasury and an allocation of funds is given for that purpose of the function. I do not recall how much it was in 2013, but now I think we're hearing about 300 or 374 million. But you have to look at it in context of what's going to happen tomorrow. Remember that we have about 20 heads of states and other dignitaries coming from all over the world to grace the occasion. Remember, you are going to have local people all over. The stadium is going to be full. You have to hire musicians, you have to hire entertainment, you have to transport these people, you have to take them for, you have to provide for them for refreshment and all that. Now, if you are to look at, for example, 20 presidents coming, sitting presidents, and imagine that a president comes with about 3 or 4 of his security agents. And these presidents are not going to lodge in River Road, they are going to lodge in serious hotels. So let's go by, for example, Intercontinental Hotel. What is the cost of a presidential suite at Intercontinental Hotel? One night, you are looking at about 300,000 Kenya shillings. 300,000 Kenya shillings. Or when you go to she's talking about Kempinski. When you go there, you're looking
hotel, it appears. Carry on.
You are looking at about 500,000, $500,000 a day. This is just for accommodation alone. You've not factored in the food and the cost of accommodating the escorts. So you are looking at, if you roughly look at the 12, the 20 of them coming, you're looking at almost 20 million or 30 million just to cater for that. Now they will be coming in today. Some of them will be coming in today. Some of them are coming in tomorrow. So they will probably be accommodated for about 2 days before they go back. So the security details, the number of people that are coming is huge. So I don't think that the committee, of course this question should be well answered by the committee, but I don't think that the committee is high in terms of what the cost is coming to.
You think it's reasonable? You think it's moderate?
It's moderate, considering the nature of the guests that are coming.
Joy, are you concerned in any way that during a press briefing at Kasarani last week, I think members of the press tried to ask Kinyua, who's leading that committee, about a breakdown, and that has not been forthcoming? Okay, the law says there's a procedure if you want to get the breakdown. I think a number of days after the presidential function, you can then write to that committee and they can nevertheless give you that. But because of all the hullabaloo around this, would it just have been easier for Kinyua to say, this goes to this, that goes to that, this goes to that, and just get rid of the speculation once and for all?
It might be that even if he seized of that information, he's not willing to divulge it because of security issues or some other concerns. Exactly. Because I would imagine, for example, if he tells you X amount of money is going to pay this hotel and that hotel, we're in an age of terrorism, and information is one of the tools that...
You'll allow me to interrupt you. We have a challenge with your mic, so I'll come back to you as soon as we can sort that out. But Michael, I can ask you the same question then. Again, could this have been easier if a full disclosure happened from the beginning? Although the law is in their favor, that they do not have to reveal to members of the public how that money has been allocated until a later date. But nevertheless, your take?
You know, this is one of those things that Kenya has always had issues with, information and how to relay that information to the people so that we don't allow people to have speculations and come with figures that are quite wrong. And I do not see a reason, whether they use $1 billion or $2 billion for that information for this inauguration. I don't see a reason why they can tell people they were using $1 billion or $2 billion. If anything, these are the guests of the state, and the state will have to foot their bills, just like if the president is going somewhere in another country and is a guest of that country, the country that he's visiting will have to foot their bills. Correct. And so there's no question about it. I mean, people might say all manner of things they want to say in regards to how much is being spent, but if it is justifiable, if it is a money that has gone for what it's supposed to go for, it is only prudent that the country knows that our money has been used to this extent without necessarily probing like the media was trying to probe and find out how much it is. And it was not just forthcoming. You know, we live in an era where basically corruption is our biggest cancer in this country. And for that reason, anytime you do not come up with a clear-cut communication of how much you spend, people will speculate that there could be some corruption, and that is why you do not want to divulge that information. It's key for the communication and the figures to come out, because even if we say anything, they'll still use it anyway.
Okay, sorry, I have to interrupt you, and Joy, I'll come back to you, and Gabriel. Let's now go back to the Windsor Golf Club, where CS Matiang'i is now making his speech or presentation at the International Conference on Drugs and Law Enforcement.
On addressing and countering the drug problem is sharing of best practices between the Americas, Africa, and Asia. It is opportune that this conference is taking place at a time when countries around the world are at crossroads in combating drug trafficking and the associated problems. I strongly believe that sharing of the best practices will significantly contribute to addressing the drug problem in this region and in the world at large. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenya is a signatory to 3 international drug conventions, and that illustrates the importance that our country attaches to combating the drug problem. We are signatories to the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs of 1961, as amended by the 1972 Protocol. We are signatories to the Convention of Psychotropic Substances of 1971, and we are signatories to the United Nations Convention against illicit trafficking in narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances of 1988. Trafficking in illicit drugs poses threats to the health and security of people and regions across the world. I believe there are quite a number of colleagues in this audience who will share experiences such as we have in some parts of our country of some of the effects we have seen of drug consumption. The speaker before me spoke about the consumption of drugs in the coastal part of our country, and we have seen the effects of that on our young people. And that's why this is really very important for us. And I will shortly say certain things which reflect how candid we want to be about dealing with this problem in our midst. Here in Kenya, recently, we have just deported over 30 drug peddlers posing as students in various universities in the country. I've had occasion recently to speak to some of our universities and university managers who admit international students who pose as international students, but they are actually drug traffickers. We have imposed serious responsibility on some of our universities, and we are prepared to go to whatever extent to ensure that those institutions are not used as avenues for drug trafficking. And that is why we have been fairly ruthless in deporting any students or any international students who have been in some of our universities who have either been caught or who we have sufficient information to believe are part of drug trafficking rings. And this is a problem that I'm sure that some of you may share. Many countries across the globe bear the brunt generated by the trade in illicit drugs on the health and socio-economic well-being of their populations, as well as security and political stability of some countries. Global reports indicate an upward trend in the abuse of drugs and a shift from the use of traditional substances to new drugs, including new psychotropic substances and synthetic cannabinoids. According to the World Drug Report for 2017, the number of estimated persons using drugs has steadily increased over the last 20 years. In 2006, the number of estimated persons using drugs stood at 208 million and is currently at about 255 million in 2015. Indeed, out of the 255 million people using drugs, 29.5 million suffer from drug use disorders and eventually requiring treatment and rehabilitation. The number is shot up. These statistics are old. The number has since shot up to, close to about 1 billion. I was fortunate to come in when one of the speakers was talking about the statistics and what that means. And the numbers keep going up. And for reasons that we all know, Africa is no longer an island, and we are beginning to see the numbers growing up with a growing middle class, growing interactions between African countries and the rest of the world. And the fact that some of our countries on the continent are now easily accessible because of improved means of communication and means of transport. The upward trend in the use and abuse of drugs has consequently resulted in an increased supply of illicit drugs. To meet the demand, drug suppliers have devised numerous strategies to smuggle substances into countries, and at times they have outwitted law enforcement officers. Further, they have experimented in the manufacture of synthetic drugs such as those that the stimulants and new psychoactive substances. These have proved to be more fatal than traditional substances as their composition remains largely unknown. Ladies and gentlemen, we face this crisis, all of us. We have tried our best as a country through various means. Through NACADA, we've tried to invest very heavily in creating awareness or trying to wage a war to prevent drug abuse in our country. 2, we have invested in treatment and rehabilitation. As government, we have supported government agencies like the Ministry of Health to invest in treatment and rehabilitation. And this is where it hurts most for a government, that we are forced to spend exchequer resources to treat and rehabilitate parts of our population that have been affected by drug consumption. Resources we need to do other things, or resources we need to develop other parts of our country. We've invested heavily in enforcement and trying to suppress the supply of drugs. The Director of Criminal Investigations, Mr. Ndewa Moro, is here with me, will tell you how hard they work and how hard they are forced to work to try as much as possible to crack down on drug suppliers. I've given you the example of just recently, I have signed over 30 deportation orders targeting traffickers who reside in some of our universities. We have invested very heavily in border control, as it were, working very closely with member states of the East African Community. We have created very stringent systems of border control. But let me not pretend here, we haven't been 100% successful, even with that strict enforcement of border control, which again presents a situation that we all need to look at, and a situation that we all need to be alive to, that however hard we work, the traffickers and the suppliers sometimes seem to think ahead of us, as it were, in terms of how they move drugs around and how they supply. You remember in our country 2 years ago, our president took 2 very drastic decisions, directed that we blow up, vessels off the Indian Ocean coast that were caught with drugs. And even with that strong enforcement of border control, we still have certain challenges. We have invested heavily in interagency collaboration against drug abuse. We've tried to build what I'm going to advocate for at the end of my speech for the continent and for all of us, a wholesome approach where we bring together all the agencies that are involved to try and address this issue of drug trafficking. It cannot be a one agency affair. We cannot do it effectively as law enforcement people. We cannot do it effectively as awareness raising people. We cannot do it effectively as health practitioners and health sector. We must build a wholesome approach, and all of the above approach, which brings together everybody on board to try and push this. We've tried this, and we are in the middle of discussing a consistent and inclusive strategy as a government of addressing this issue of drugs. We tried very hard to control drugs in prisons, in our country. I walked in when the president was talking about use of drugs in prisons. Strict control, and again, here I must confess, we haven't been 100% successful. There are factors that we need to look into to see how best we can ensure 100% success in controlling use of drugs in the prisons. And if we succeeded in that particular area, chances are that we will have covered a huge ground as we go forward. We've worked very well with all international agencies, and my colleagues in the law enforcement sector, the director of CID is here, and our police department has been very successful in working with their colleagues across the board within the region in collaborating to ensure that we address this effectively. We, of course, have worked very hard on development of legislation and policies. Again, an experience that I think we need to share is that we need strong and much more stringent legislative ecosystems, very strict laws and regulations. Although, of course, we will debate whether, in and of themselves, strict laws will help us. But as we said, this is not going to be a one bullet approach. We have to adopt many approaches to this. We've tried to enact legislation and come up with serious policies on drug use and prevention of drug trafficking, but this continues to be a challenge. I'm therefore grateful, really, that this conference brings together a huge number of us to share experiences and to ask and answer the question, what else can we do to ensure that we deal with the supply and consumption of drugs in our region, as it were, especially the illicit supply and consumption of drugs in our region. We acknowledge the strong relationship between drug trafficking, corruption, and other forms of organized crime, such as terrorism, money laundering, and human and firearms trafficking, which usually complicates the fight against the drug problem. If we were to speak to each other honestly, as governments, the complexity of drug trafficking is made even much more worse because of the interrelationship between drug trafficking, money laundering, corruption, and human trafficking. And again, it poses a new challenge that when we are looking at drug trafficking, we shouldn't just look at it as an isolated problem. We also need to address issues related to corruption and other forms of crime, which either abet or benefit from drug trafficking as we go forward. I'd like to conclude my remarks by saying this. For us on the African continent, and for those of you, my brothers and sisters from the region, three criticals in my view. Number one, I agree with the proposal that at the level of AU, African countries now need to be serious and coordinated on the issue of drug trafficking. If drug trafficking has been reported in 30 countries of the continent. We would be deluding ourselves if we thought time is not here for us to take this very seriously. So it's critical that we pay great attention to drug trafficking. We elevate the conversation to the continental level. We elevate the conversation to the AU level. And my sister from the AU, it's time for us to be a bit more aggressive in dealing with this so that we can build a better regional collaboration, a better international engagement, and a better coordinated approach to drug trafficking across the board. Two, I think it's time we thought hard about a very wholesome approach to drug trafficking. Wholesome here, I mean, sometimes we deal with this as though it's a problem for the law enforcement agencies alone or for the health sector practitioners alone. I would suggest that, and I was so grateful to hear that ministers of justice and players within the justice sector are going to be part of this. We need to address our judiciaries across the board. We all need to build an inclusive army that will fight drug trafficking. It's not going to be a law enforcement issue alone. It must involve others. And we must get to a room where we look at all dimensions of this problem. And for us on the continental law, again, much as we want to invest in developing law enforcement instruments and structures so that we can deal with drug trafficking, we also need to develop justice systems so that they are both conscious, supportive, and ready to play their part in assisting in drug trafficking, as it were. So a wholesome approach will help us a great deal. And then, lastly, we should be very worried on the continent, especially because of an emerging evil nexus between drug trafficking, money laundering, corruption, and the instability of governance across the board. At the risk of sounding alarmist, I want to say this to fellow governments across the continent. If we do not address this issue decisively now, and if we don't create institutional frameworks to combat drug trafficking and its related challenges, soon enough, drug traffickers, drug peddlers will launder themselves into decision-making organs of the continent, and with it, we will have lost all the economic development that we are looking at, and with it, we would have lost the hope of the continent. Because usually, the target of these drug traffickers, together with money launderers, the target usually is access to political power. Because access to political power then provides the bedrock upon which the trade will thrive. So we have this opportunity that we should not waste now that we have within the room colleagues who have dealt with these challenges over and over again, to learn from one another, to take on board positive experiences that have worked elsewhere, to candidly confront this challenge with a view to ensuring that we must keep the continent's generation safe, and we must protect the hope and future of our societies by fighting drug trafficking. Because if we don't, the socio-economic and political instability associated to this is real, and it will happen. And much of what we are working on now and the investments we are making now will all be subverted if the drug trafficking business, money laundering, and the corruption that come with it are allowed to thrive. So I think it is responsible for us to act, and act now, act decisively, act in a focused manner, and deal with this as a challenge that will not just go away without our focused action. I want once again to thank the UNODC for the wonderful work that has gone into putting us together. And look forward to constant collaboration with all of you in the room and assure you of our government's total commitment and support to an all-out and focused war against drug trafficking. Thank you.
Well, brief sort of, you could put it that way, speech there by Interior CS Dr. Fred Matiang'i. He was launching the International Conference on Drugs and Law Enforcement. He spoke quite in detail about the drug menace that is, quite visible in Africa. He said it's not like the previous days when Africa was out of the loop. Right now, drugs passing through Africa, something that needs to be looked into. He's spoken about money laundering and other issues as well, and thanked agencies like the United Nations for the work that they are doing to fight the drug menace in Africa, this being an international, not just a national conference. We'll give you more updates on the proceedings there as and when we get them. We continue with our discussion, of course, on the politics of the day, even as we count down to tomorrow's swearing in of President Uhuru Kenyatta. That is a topic that we'll be discussing on the other side of this break. But let me just briefly introduce my panelists who we will move into the next hour with. We've switched the panel a bit, changed the gender balance in here right now. So let me start right next to me. Joy Mdivo, an advocate, carries on with us into the next part of the program. Jemima Kelly, an advocate as well. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Right next to Jemima, we have Ruth Ambogo, who is a political analyst, other titles which I will use for another day. Also joins us here in studio. And Kai Kissinger continues to stay here with us, an advocate of the High Court. We take a quick break right now on Citizen Extra. We'll be right back. I'll be reading your feedback on the other side of this break, even as we look at what to expect tomorrow. We'll be right back.